Okay, let's rank those doctors. Now, just a quick reminder of the previous episode, which I hope you've seen. Of course, it's still available on my channel. I ranked the doctors in 13th, 12th and 11th position. And you will recall that in 13th position, sadly, the very wonderful Colin Baker. 11th place, no, 12th place, we had Sylvester McCoy, the final classic series doctor. And in 11th place, we had Paul Mcgann, the TV movie doctor. If you're wondering why I put them in those three positions, you'll need to go back and look at that previous video. I've given them all, I think, a fair crack of the whip and explain why they rank so lowly and the problems I think the show had. I think Paul McGann's ranking is fairly self-evident. He had a 1.5 hour TV movie that he didn't appear in until half an hour, and that one short Night of the Doctor mini episode that was screened to coincide with the anniversary. And I must point out again at this point that these rankings are purely based on Doctor Who on TV. I'm not taking into account Big Finish. I understand that many of the doctors have done good work on Big Finish. I'm not taking into account books, comic strips, anything, because for the purpose of this particular series, Doctor Who canon is what we've seen on TV. Anything else is extended fan fiction. So, without any further ado, let's look at my number 10. All right, well, in 10th place, this is going to be very controversial. It's going to upset a lot of people. It's going to anger a lot of people. But I hope to be able to explain why I feel this way, even if you disagree extremely violently. In 10th place, unfortunately, I'm putting Peter Capaldi, who was, of course, the 12th Doctor. I genuinely have to think about this sometimes. He was the 12th Doctor from 2013 to 2016. And it pains me to put him in a fairly lowly position, but I hope that you will understand why I feel that way. Peter Capaldi's a brilliant actor. He's given superb performances in things like The Thick of It, Local Heroes, one of his first roles. He's an Oscar winner, for God's sake, for a short film that he directed many years ago. He was brilliant in Torchwood, where he played the agonized politician who had to deal with the threat of the aliens who were abducting children and the terrible realization that he might lose his own children and the terrible decision he had to make. He was superb in that. And moreover, he's been a Doctor Who fan all his life. He was involved in the early days of Doctor Who fandom, as some of you may know. It's been quite well chronicled that there was a sort of a battle for supremacy between him and another Doctor Who fan for control of the Doctor Who fan club back in the 70s. And he was actually considered a bit of a thorn in the side of the BBC back then. Just shows how people's lives can change. So when he got the role of the Doctor, I'm sure it was the opportunity of a lifetime to play the role of a lifetime, a role that he cherished as a child, and the role that he wanted to grab with both hands and run with and do something incredible with. The reason that I feel he didn't is purely creative, and it falls at the feet of the creative minds working on the show at the time. Now, I am on record, if you're a reader of Starburst magazine or you've listened to the TV Zone Plus podcast that I present with my chum Scott Holmes, you will know that I'm not the biggest fan in the world of Stephen Moffat, who was the showrunner of Doctor Who from 2010 till 2017. I'm not going to go into all the reasons for that here, but I think his perception of what the Doctor is and should be is severely at odds with mine, which is always going to make it difficult for me to embrace whatever he does with the character. He had that sort of, well, he always characterized the Doctor as a madman with a box, and that was something which scuppered a little bit Matt Smith, who took over from David Tennant in 2010, because my belief is always that the Doctor isn't a madman in a box. He's not a madman at all. The Doctor, in any gender, in any incarnation, I've always held the Doctor out as being the sane one. In any given situation, the Doctor is the voice of sanity. He or she may behave eccentrically, may behave erratically and unpredictably, but there's a clean intellect, a sharp intellect that isn't madness. And I think trying to create the Doctor as a madman with a box is nothing more than just a glib catchphrase. And that's the problem I have with a lot of Stephen Moffat's era on Doctor Who. He worked on catchphrases and glib jokes and very samey and repetitive ideas. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of dissecting Stephen Moffat, because that's not what this video series is all about. But I think that the problem that we had with Peter Capaldi, he came in after Stephen Moffat had been running the show for 3 years, and I think he had already exhausted his box of tricks in terms of what he thought the Doctor should be. He thought the Doctor's world should be this slightly airy fairy tale where nobody really died, and he enjoyed these stories about time paradoxes and things repeating themselves, which are fine and clever when you do it once or twice, but they were sort of repeated memes that he kept going back to. And a lot of the new alien threats he created, because he had success with the Weeping Angels in series 3 of the rebooted Doctor Who, he went back to that theme of creatures with gimmicks, things that you couldn't see if you turned away, things you would forget about. The Weeping Angels themselves, of course, you couldn't blink because they would creep closer and destroy you. It's a great idea, but he kept regurgitating that idea. And he kept regurgitating the theme of well-meaning technology going wrong. We had that in his very first story in Christopher Eccleston's series, the nanobots who were recreating humans with gas masks, because that was the first human that they came across. Technology that is trying to help, but ultimately ends up doing more harm than good. And that's a theme that comes back again and again and again in Stephen Moffat's era. So I feel that when Peter Capaldi took over, I think that the cupboard was bare creatively, and some strange decisions were made in how to characterize this new Doctor. Now, I mentioned when I was discussing Colin Baker what a ill-advised idea it was in the 80s to have an unlikable, grumpy, misanthropic Doctor. And Colin Baker, as good as he is, it was hard for him to get beyond that characterization that was imposed upon him. And I understand that it was done at the time as a direct opposite of Peter Davison, who was very nice and very pleasant, and Tom Baker, who was the classic eccentric. And I think it was an attempt possibly to go back to that Tom Baker template by putting him in a bizarre costume and making him unpredictable. But I think he was too unpleasant too soon. And Stephen Moffat made exactly the same mistake with Peter Capaldi. You have a great actor, but you had the whole theme of it in his first season of, am I a good man? He was sharp. He was sarcastic to people, arrogant, rude. And that doesn't make for a likable hero. And I think that in any TV series, especially one with the sort of multi or cross-generational appeal of Doctor Who, to have your lead character as essentially unlikable and a bit of a git, I think it's not a good idea. Even these days of sophisticated television entertainment, you have to have a hero that you identify with and like. Perhaps not so much identify with, because that's a concept which I'm slightly at odds with, really. But I think you have to like the lead character to want to find out what he or she is doing. And if that person's being arrogant and rude and insufferable, you're sort of tempted to think, well, not interested in you, mate. And I think that's the mistake that they made in that first series. Now, I want to say, I'm not criticising Peter Capaldi for anything that he did in his 3 years. His performance was always absolutely impeccable. No matter what material he had, he rose to it and above it and gave it more gravitas, and that's a word I also try to avoid, gave it more gravitas than it often deserved. He gave it his all at all times. But I just feel he was let down by slightly derivative, half-conceived or ill-conceived, half-realised ideas. And I think that what had happened in that first series, and again, I have no insider knowledge, it's just, all this is just my perception. All I know is what I've read about the history of Doctor Who, and for the modern series of Doctor Who, where some of the behind-the-scenes stuff is still not publicly known. But my perception is at the end of Peter Capaldi's first season, remember that image he had in that first season? That sort of John Pertwee-esque, very sharp-suited, closely cropped hair, the velvet-lined coat. It was very much a Pertwee look, and I approved of that. But for some reason, it was the characterization that didn't work. And I think in the second season, I think they did a massive turnabout. And I don't know, I haven't seen the statistics or the breakdown of the audience, but I suspect, and also sadly an older Doctor isn't, and it's a shocking condemnation of the modern world, I'm afraid, but perhaps the modern audience, having had a couple of handsome Doctors or pin-up Doctors with David Tennant and the curiously good-looking Matt Smith, to suddenly be presented with a man in his late 50s with grey hair, not classically hunky, good-looking sort of guy, must have been a bit of a culture shock. And I know from personal experience that a lot of people who'd watched Doctor Who, perhaps rather shallowly because they fancied the lead man, weren't interested anymore. And again, it's a terrible condemnation of people's priorities these days, but sex sells. And I think that much as Peter Capaldi is a fantastic actor, he's not really a sex symbol. So that audience was going to be a hard one to hang on to. And I think also the young audience was turned off by the fact that he was so unlikable. And I think that what they did for his second series, which was series 9, they did an emergency about face, and they tried to sort of young him up a little bit, which I think did Peter Capaldi no favours, because I think it was vaguely embarrassing to suddenly have him in wearing hoodies. Sonic Screwdriver was supplemented by sonic shades and playing the rock guitar. I mean, I remember a dreadful sequence. I think it must have been the first episode of his second season where he rides into this episode on a tank playing the guitar. And it just struck me as a middle-aged man's idea of what young people like, or young people like people who dress scruffily and play the guitar and wear cool shades, even though that sort of rock star thing is very much the domain of the middle-aged man these days, because if you look at the pop music charts these days, you don't see any rock music in there. It's all rap and R&B and black music. So to try and reconstruct Peter Capaldi as a rock god was just a bizarre idea that was probably 20 years out of time. And it just reeked of desperation, a desperate attempt to try and reel in an audience that had lost interest in the show because the Doctor was essentially a rude, unlikable man. But he never recovered from that. He could never recover from that. I mean, I think Series 9 is pretty terrible overall. Season 10, where they introduced Pearl Mackie as a new companion, Bill Potts, was an improvement. They tried to sort of reboot the series because the first episode was called The Pilot. But then that episode was about, yep, you guessed it, a misunderstood bit of technology that was effectively hurting mankind when it meant to help them, really. So you felt, oh, we've got that again. We've got that again. And as the series wore on, we started to get more into the mythology, the arcane, obscure mythology that doesn't really appeal to many people outside the fan base. And it's difficult because Doctor Who's been around for nearly 60 years. It's got a huge weight of continuity, which its fans love and adore, and they don't like it if they think it's being tampered with, as we've seen recently, even if they're misguided at the time, but we'll come to that a bit later on. Yeah, the series just became a bit more distant, and it resembled that private party feel that I felt it had in the 80s, where, you know, if you didn't have a degree in Doctor Who, you weren't really welcome. You had to know about the history of the Zygons and the history of the Time Lords and the Master, the history of the Master, and Missy as she became, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I just think it all became messy and over-convoluted and just not inclusive in the way that the series had become under Russell T Davies, who understood what you needed to keep and what you needed to get rid of Doctor Who mythology to make it appeal to a wide audience. And I think that the show suffered then by the fact that the showrunner was just out of steam, regurgitating his past glories, trying to appeal to the fans rather than the audience. There was the episode, I think it's called Heaven Sent, which is the episode towards the end of season 9, where Clara has his companion Jenna Coleman, who incidentally also stayed too long in the series, which gave it a certain sense of repetition and ennui when it needed a few new ideas and new characters. She'd apparently died, and the story was supposed to be about the Doctor's grief. And a lot of fans say, oh, it's a masterpiece. His performance is fantastic. And it's a wonderful piece of writing. Yeah, Peter Capaldi's performance is fantastic, but all we really have is the story written by a showrunner who has nothing else. He can't be bothered to create any new characters or new situations. So he writes this pretentious chamber piece about the Doctor locked in a tower, which he knows will impress the fans because it's not been done before, but the general audience don't care. And I could see through it, basically. We have Missy as well, of course. She was a major sort of revelation in the series when she appeared at the beginning of his first season as this rather eccentric Mary Poppins type character who would welcome people to heaven. It was a running theme throughout the series. It was intriguing, and I must admit, I didn't make the connection, Missy and the Master. I know a lot of people were thinking it was some sort of Time Lord thing, but I don't think many people had really sussed that it was going to be the Master regendered. Of course, this had come along. There's been a lot of talk for ages about the Doctor becoming a woman, and Stephen Moffat has certainly planted those bombs throughout his time with various other Time Lord characters becoming women and uttering slightly unsubtle dialogue. So that was all there. Of course, Stephen Moffat didn't have the courage to actually cast a female Doctor. He sort of planted it and made it almost inevitable and unavoidable that his successor would pick a female Doctor. But again, we'll come to that later. I just feel the whole Peter Capaldi year is such a wasted opportunity, such a waste of a great actor. Stories were very weak. I think most fans, even those fans who love Peter Capaldi, will agree that a lot of his material was very poor and very repetitious and carried on that theme of sort of a lack of real jeopardy because Stephen Moffat just didn't like unhappy endings. He didn't, as Russell T Davies used to say, that Doctor Who steeped in death. Stephen Moffat's version was more everybody lives, and it was all, everything always went back to the status quo, and people who died came back to life. And the threat was never really, or very rarely, a real threat. So that's why, for me, the Peter Capaldi era collapses and has to come quite low in the rankings. I mean, of course, the show looks good. It's looked good ever since it came back in 2005. But looking at terms of the stories and the arcs and the characters, I found Jenna Coleman's Clara to be a bit smug and insufferable, and a bit cold. Pearl Mackie's Bill was a better, bouncier sort of character, but again, even her ending in the series was exactly the same as Clara's, being effectively destroyed as a human being and reincarnated as a life force traveling the universe with another mysterious cosmic force. This is just another example of the showrunner's lack of imagination, I suppose, or repeating his ideas. So anyway, that's why, sadly, Mr. Peter Capaldi arrives in 10th place in my list of the Doctors. Apologies to all those Peter Capaldi fans, but I hope that I've explained my reasoning, even if you disagree with it horribly. Right, in 9th place. In 9th place, and again, this is going to annoy a lot of people, but it's for much the same reasons as Peter Capaldi. It's Matt Smith, who played the 10th Doctor. He had the unenviable task of replacing David Tennant, who'd become hugely popular. He was I would argue he's one of the 3 Doctors who, David Tennant that is, he created in Doctor Who a cultural moment, a moment where the Doctor captured the zeitgeist. And I think that William Hartnell and Tom Baker also did it. They suddenly made the Doctor more than just a cult TV figure. It was a sort of a mass appeal phenomenon. That doesn't always happen. And it was difficult for Matt Smith and Stephen Moffat, to be fair, to follow what Russell T Davies had done inadvertently or otherwise, creating this incredibly inclusive, popular version of the Doctor. David Tennant was just an everyman Doctor. Everyone liked him. I mean, it was that classic cliche of women wanted to be with him and men wanted to be him because he had this swagger, this rock star swagger about him. And it was a great era creatively as well. Matt Smith then came along, a young actor in his 20s who didn't have a great deal of knowledge about Doctor Who. When his showrunner, Mr. Moffat, tells him that the Doctor is an eccentric madman with a box, I think he sort of played it that way. And after a while, I became a little tired of his constant sort of his arm waving and his geekiness and his clumsiness, which has a certain appeal, and I understand a lot of people find that quite affecting, but it just became a little bit irritating to me because, as I said, the Doctor isn't the madman. But that misapprehension that Stephen Moffat seems to have, which baffles me because he's been a fan since he was a kid himself. He knows the Doctor. He must know the Doctor isn't a madman, but unfortunately he gave that impression of the Doctor to an actor who didn't know the part very well, and his portrayal suffered accordingly. Plus, I think, again, some stories were very limp. You had, again, those repeated motifs of misunderstood machinery, trying to help humanity but inadvertently putting it in danger. You had the creatures like the Silence and the Weeping Angels who kept coming back even though they were really a one-hit wonder. And unlikable supporting characters, I have to say. Karen Gillan has gone on to have an incredible career, but I found Amy Pond beyond irritating. That sort of slightly smug, self-obsessed sort of me characterization, which I just abhorred. It was all about her all the time. And her drippy boyfriend stroke husband, Rory, played by Arthur Darvill. They all seemed like lovely people. But I just found that he was that cliche of the henpecked boyfriend or husband, under the thumb of the dominant, powerful woman. And I just find that a little bit tedious. And I think that, and it was interesting, I suppose, that the series perhaps became a bit younger under Stephen Moffat with these three, because they were sort of in their 20s, these three young stars who found themselves leading this very popular show. And this was the time when Doctor was really breaking in America. David Tennant had done the groundwork in breaking the show abroad, and it was still on a roll when these three came along. And I understand that they were very popular. And it was purely down to me. I didn't get that sort of, you'd see them in the behind the scenes stuff clowning around, and you'd think, yeah, it has come down a lot. Because if you think the previous season, we'd had David Tennant in his mid to late 30s, Catherine Tate in her 40s. It was an older series then, and it seemed to skew older. And it became much younger with these three. And it was interesting to watch their voyage of discovery and excitement at being in this big hit show that was popular across the world. But I think in terms of the stories, they became increasingly convoluted. Again, it was Stephen Moffat playing to his fan gallery and creating storylines that he thought would impress the fans. And they might well have done, but they frustrated and irritated a casual viewer who couldn't really follow a lot of what was going on, mainly because a lot of it really didn't make sense. I think Stephen Moffat came up with these ideas for things, was never able to properly explain them and properly follow them through. So you have lots of loose ends and lots of slightly tedious storylines. The whole thing with River Song, again, who's a character who was flogged to death during Stephen Moffat's era. No interest in that character beyond her first appearance. And this idea that she kept meeting various doctors through different timelines, and she was Amy and Rory's daughter, and all the stuff in season 6 about Madame Kovarian trying to breed an assassin. It was just too dense for an audience that just wanted an adventure in space and time every Saturday night, and ultimately unfulfilling because most of these things didn't have much of a payoff. And then for his final season, of course, these two left and then replaced by Clara, who seemed to have a better rapport, or a more playful rapport, I suppose, if you like, because there was clearly that sort of friendship stroke romance between them, which was never taken any further. But again, having found Clara, again, very much like Amy and Rory, just there to crack jokes, which is another theme of that particular era of Doctor Who. And I appreciate that the last 10, 15 minutes or so have just sounded like me taking a hatchet to Stephen Moffat's era, but it is something which I feel quite strongly about, is that's where the rot began for modern Doctor Who. People say, oh, Chris Chibnall has ruined Doctor Who. But no, I think he's tried to course correct from what Stephen Moffat's era did in taking the show out of the public eye and making it something which appealed more to fans. And I know that fans do like Matt Smith, and they do like Peter Capaldi, and they like him. They like all that arcane stuff, because a lot of them think that Doctor Who doesn't belong in the public domain. Doctor Who should be the domain of the fans who know it all. That's not something I've particularly ever agreed with. I love it when Doctor Who's big and popular and everyone's talking about it. And that just wasn't happening anymore as you got deeper into Matt Smith's era. But he was very likeable. He was clearly very passionate about the show. And I was quite surprised when he left. Of course, he straddled the 50th anniversary, which was a big era for Doctor Who, to be fair, even though I don't think the anniversary episode of The Day of the Doctor really bears up to many repeated viewings, because it is quite inconsequential as a story, and not much happens. There's a lot of talking, a lot of jokes, but not much real action or excitement, which is what you want in an episode like that. But it sort of worked at the time. Watching it at the time, it was nice to see David Tennant back. It was wonderful to see Tom Baker playing a little cameo. So I think the anniversary year worked very well, and kudos to Stephen Moffat and everybody at the BBC for making that a very special anniversary year. But unfortunately, he left with a terrible story, a shockingly bad Time of the Doctor, which basically wasn't really a story at all. It just tried to tie up various loose ends. Stephen Moffat imposing his reasoning for the Doctor having a new lease of life. Of course, in the chronology of the series, the Doctor has 12 lives, and Stephen Moffat created a plot strand where, by the Time Lords, gave the Doctor the magical ability to have another regeneration cycle by effectively sprinkling fairy dust through a crack in time. Again, it's the fairy tale thing, which I just found so sickly and so grating. So despite, an over lively performance from Matt Smith, he has to come in that position in my rankings because I feel that the whole era, for me, doesn't really work. There are individually stories that are quite good. I recently watched Vampires in Venice from his first series, mainly as a sort of tribute to Helen McCrory, who passed away recently, and she was great in it. And it was a good adventure. The series wasn't yet bogging itself down with this over arcane storytelling that our friend Mr. Moffat was keen on. But unfortunately, that's why Matt Smith falls into 9th place in my favourite Doctor ranking. In 8th place, is, and this was difficult because I was sort of torn between number 8 and number 7, but I'm putting this particular Doctor in number 8 because the story's not yet told. It's the current Doctor, it's Jodie Whittaker. It might surprise people she's number 8 because I know a lot of the hardcore fans, and again, this is probably a section that will annoy a lot of fans who, they're not my Doctor imbeciles, as I like to call them. I would possibly have put her a bit higher, but, there is more story to be told. There's at least one more season of her to go, being filmed at the moment. And I think that I'm putting her in this position because I think that in her last season, things got a lot better. Now, I think when Chris Chibnall took over, as I've said, and again, this is purely my comprehension of what was going on behind the scenes, but Doctor Who was on the ropes a little bit. The ratings had just tumbled really badly during Peter Capaldi's time. People hadn't taken to that interpretation. And Chris Chibnall, I think, was sort of culturally obliged to cast a woman as the Doctor because it was what the current cultural landscape demanded. He cast Jodie Whittaker, who he'd worked with before in Broadchurch. So it does, you have to sort of wonder, well, was anybody else considered? Did anybody else audition, or was she always up for the part? I don't know. But I like Jodie Whittaker. I think that she embraces the part. She clearly enjoys the part. Again, she's not somebody who knew much about the series when she took over. And I do accept that a lot of her performance does look as if she has Googled David Tennant, who was her friend on Broadchurch, looked at how he played it and tried to do something similar. Wacky, fast-talking, zany. So she hasn't brought anything new to the character of the Doctor, and I fully accept that, apart from the fact that she's now a woman. But I do like the fact that they haven't hammered that home all that much. I mean, her costume, if you look at it, is fairly sort of asexual. They haven't hammered the femininity thing as much as I thought they would, to be honest, bearing in mind that they've hammered quite a lot of other things, quite unsubtly, during her 2 years so far. But I think that her first season was quite limp. I loved her first episode. I thought that was really good, crackled with energy, really good ideas. I liked the new companion characters. But the rest of the series didn't really take off. Again, the problem was it was very issue-led in places. The Rosa Parks episode was terrific, of course, but many episodes seemed to be hampered by issues about gender and identity and sexuality and all these things which, okay, they're valid things to discuss in any drama series, even in Doctor Who. But Doctor Who's always done this with much more subtlety. The Pertwee era in particular used to deal with a lot of sort of modern cultural issues. I think that season 11 of Doctor Who didn't do it with much in the way of subtlety. And again, I think there wasn't much in the way of jeopardy. The stories were quite tame. Demons of the Punjab, for example, is, I'm sure, a very worthy subject, but there was nothing interesting going on in that episode. There's no real excitement. And the finale was a damp script. So I think season 11 was a bit limp. There were issues with the companion characters. 3 companions is just too much for the Doctor in a 45-minute TV episode these days. It doesn't really work. And I don't think they were all particularly well served. Bradley Walsh, of course, is terrific. He was very good as Graham. Mandeep Gill is Yaz, who is still around in the show. Very rarely got much to do by way of action. And Tosin Cole, bless him, who played Ryan, I have to say, not a great actor. His lines sort of fell flat quite a lot of the time. So it wasn't a great series, and I felt that Jodie Whittaker's performance was adequate, but not inspired. The reason that she ranks much more highly than you might expect, though, is because I really enjoyed season 12. That, for me, was the best season of Doctor Who since season 4, which was David Tennant's last season, because I think Chris Chibnall he decided that season 11 was going to be Doctor Who back to square one, get a new audience on board who perhaps didn't know the history, because there was very little backstory in that first season, a couple of little references here and there, but apart from the Dalek that appeared in the New Year's episode, Revolution. It was Revolution, yeah. That was the only real back reference. But that episode was a hint that he was ready to open the door a little bit and let the continuity through, which he did, and how he did it in season 12. Now, it was unfortunate that season 11's viewing figures sort of dropped as the run progressed, but that was because the stories weren't great. And I don't think it's down to Jodie Whittaker, although they're not my Doctor imbeciles and all the YouTube people who post these ludicrous videos would have you believe otherwise. I don't think it was because of Jodie Whittaker. It's just the stories weren't good enough. And yeah, I accept there's an element, not just amongst the fans, but amongst the general audience, that don't think the Doctor should be a woman. That's not something I'm getting into here. That's maybe to discuss another time. The Doctor is currently a woman. We have to live with that, whether you like it or not. But I do feel Series 12, by and large, there were 2 duff episodes, but it was damn good stuff. I loved the season opener, Spyfall. Such a good, fast-paced, witty script. Beautiful production values, with the show filming in South Africa to replicate America and Australia. And that's one thing I will say about this current era of Doctor Who. Until this series, of course, because COVID has forced it all to be filmed in the UK, it really looked big and globetrotting because they filmed all over the place. And I think Spyfall was such a witty script. There's so much going on. Stephen Fry as the MI5 or MI6 chief. Sacha Dhawan as O, this mysterious new agent. The mysterious alien creatures, the Kasavin, these sort of shadowy creatures. It was a really good story, a really good script, fantastic action set pieces, the lovely Bond riffing stuff, the music by Segun Akinola. Spyfall 1 for me would rank in my top 5 of favourite modern Who episodes. And again, that might scandalise quite a few people, but go figure. Part 2 wasn't as good. I accept it wasn't as good. That was the more time travel-y episode that seemed more traditional Doctor Who. But the sparks between Jodie Whittaker and Sacha Dhawan as the Master was undeniable. I mean, she really raised her game to develop as this 2 contrasting aliens. The Doctor-Master relationship came across really well. And I just thought it was terrific performances by the pair of them. And again, later on this season, I think the Nikola Tesla episode was really good. Fugitive of the Judine was a great episode, which saw the return of the Judine and, of course, Captain Jack Harkness. And, of course, wending our way towards the finale, the whole Timeless Child controversy. I could go into this for hours, I suppose. Fans who scream that Doctor Who's continuity has been wrecked and Chris Chibnall has rewritten the history of Doctor Who. Really, really hasn't. Because all he's done is added an extra layer to the story that we and the Doctor didn't know about. Everything we've seen of the Doctor hasn't changed at all. All it is that there's something that the Doctor doesn't know. We don't know now if that's true or an affectation by the Master. But the Doctor isn't aware of his or her life before the first Doctor we met on television. So nothing's changed, but the fans won't have that. They think the continuity's been ruined. But a lot of Doctor Who fans are very single-minded and simple-minded, unfortunately. That's the only way they'll see it. So I put Jodie Whittaker there because the story's not yet told. We've got at least 8 more episodes to come. I really hope she stays on for a 4th series because I think she's likeable. I'm very interested to see how she works out with John Bishop as the new companion, Dan. I think that could be a nice dynamic with an older, the Bradley Walsh type figure aboard the TARDIS again. So all in all, I accept that she's brought really very little new to the actual character of the Doctor, but I feel that the scripts were so much better in season 2. The production was so good. And I was more invested in it than I've been in Doctor Who since 2010. So that's why I felt she could be raised for me above Peter Capaldi and Matt Smith. Although it could be argued that they brought more nuance, more new elements to the Doctor, even albeit things I don't particularly approve of. So she lands at position number 8 in my Doctor Who rankings. I'm going to leave it there for now. And I'll come back with part 3, which will be Doctor 7, 6 and 5. Hopefully the next week or so. And then the final part the week after that, where I'll wrap up and tell you who my top Doctor is. I hesitate to say favourite because it's not that easy, but my the top of my Doctor Who rankings. I can't really put it any other way at the moment. So anyway, I'm sure that this particular section will get a lot of angry response, perhaps. Try not to be angry. As I said, it's my perception of the show, knowing a lot about its history and knowing a lot about how it's made and the people involved. And particularly the Stephen Moffat era, I know is hugely contentious. People either love it or they hate it. I don't actually hate it, having said that. I just think it misses the point of Doctor Who a lot of the time and wastes a lot of great talent. So let me know what you thought of this video in my comments. Try to keep it civil. If you're not civil, I'll just delete the comment, so you might as well not bother being too abusive. Because it is just my opinion. You're quite entitled to put Peter Capaldi at number 1. I'm quite happy with that. But this is just my sort of instinctive reactions based on what I've seen on television, what I know about how the show was made. So anyway, hope this has been an interesting watch. Do the like, subscribe thing. Don't forget the 50 by 50. I'm at 50 subscribers. And if I'm still at 50 by 50 videos, somebody who's left a comment, so leave a comment, will get picked out of some sort of hat, and they will win a prize up to the value of 50 big ones. So you got to be in it to win it. Yeah, so until next time, what do they say? They say, keep taking the stuff.